Okay. One second. Watch your coffee. All right, I think we're ready to go. Okay. We're on YouTube, we're recording.
Oh, yeah, I see.
Yep.
Is it that? Are you gonna make an announcement? We're going to get all the favor, but I'm going to do this. Yeah.
Yes. Someone said, Jonathan, my God. Excellent.
You know, it's all presentation. I can,
Yeah. Yeah, I think about that. You know, non-life bars. Carol.
So wait.
Yep.
Yeah, I know.
Instead of water.
Okay, yeah. There's been part of it.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, look at that one, I'm very good. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, this is stupid.
His idea is that people finish eating. And people finish eating, so I don't know what's going on.
Really was.
I think we're gonna get started.
Yeah.
You guys in the back, thank you. Folks, just a note of technical interest.
Yeah.
For the people who are on Zoom, it is going to be much harder for them to hear if there is crosstalk or conversation or chattering in the room. That is not Jonathan speaking. So if we can try for one person at a time speaking, usually Jonathan, that will be a better experience for everybody, at least who is not in the room. Thank you for your cooperation.
If somebody else wants to ask a question, when we get to that.
They don't have to come up, they just need to speak loudly and clearly, and as an accomplished presenter, I know that Jonathan is going to repeat the question so that everybody hears it.
And as an accomplished presenter, the questions will be at the end of the talk.
Can I have a quiet, so we can get Jonathan attention? Excuse me, folks. If you can cease your conversation, please.
We're starting.
Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to back up. I would like to introduce Jonathan Shafter, congregant who has done a lot of traveling in Caribbean, has a host of pictures and knows an awful lot about the Caribbean, and has offered his services to present this program. So this is Jonathan. He's got wonderful pictures, and he's going to start with Barbados.
Well, maybe let the speaker decide what comes first. Barbados is about the middle of this. Yes, Barbados is actually about the middle of the talk. So maybe I should just start it.
Okay,
Welcome.
we welcome Jonathan. I know he's going to do a good job. I've been to the Caribbean, have seen Jewish sites in the Caribbean, and it's fantastic. So let's give him a round of applause and party welcome and pay him attention. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks very much. As Rabbi Heidi said this morning, this is a tale of Jews of the Caribbean, and comes from the Columbian exploration in 1492 to 1900. The reason for that is that second part, which I hope to give in the coming months, is the modern period, and includes things like, well, just a couple of events in the 20th century that changed the settlement of peoples and so on. So we're going to focus more on the beginning. I think from a Jewish perspective, I was thinking during the service, it's not quite the destruction of the Second Temple. It's not quite the exodus from Egypt, but there's some of the same movement of peoples and persecution and other things going on in this. Anyway, I'll try to make that more clear. Okay. So how did Jews get there to begin with? So I take you back to Spain, which was a center of world Jewry around 1000 AD. It was in a golden age that included, as I say here, Maimonides. Even the guy who invented the quadratic formula was Jewish. That's a great thing for me because I'm a math guy. So by the 1300s, it was basically, that's where most of the Jews in the world were, in Spain. Unfortunately, as often happens in Jewish history, anti-Semitism, it swung to anti-Semitism, and there were all these riots. And in the riots, it was forced conversion for the first time in 1391. So there we pick up a little bit of vocabulary. If you're converted, in other words, if you're forced to be baptized, you're called a conversos, just means converted. Now, some of those conversos practiced Judaism secretly, even if they were baptized. Those are called Marranos, which actually kind of means pigs in Spanish. And those also, I think I have the Moriscos were people who were originally Muslim and forced to convert to Christianity. So it wasn't just Jews. And then the Spanish Inquisition was basically set up to then rid these Marranos and Moriscos of Spain. right? Ultimately in 1492. That's a key year, not just for Columbus, but that the king and queen of Spain, the Catholic kings, Catholic monarchs, they just were very unfriendly to Jews. The good thing is that many of these Jews who were persecuted, the ones that survived, eventually ended up in the Caribbean. Let me make that a little bit more graphical here. So initially, we're going to focus on the left side, which is where did they go from Spain? Well, many went to Portugal because at that moment it was tolerant. But again, that didn't last for long. The reason that they went to the Netherlands after Portugal was actually the Netherlands was part of the Kingdom of Spain, politically at that point, so they could move to the Netherlands. And the Netherlands is from where they essentially went to the Caribbean, places like New York and the Caribbean and Brazil. It's interesting to think about these other pathways. I think I don't have to go into them. Obviously, there was a southern diaspora that went into North Africa, and the thought there was that the Muslims would be more tolerant than Catholics would be. I don't figure Italy, but I know Italy is one path in my research, and I know that Turkey, again, that must be because of the Muslim fear. Now, of course, it's a whole nother issue if you want to start to talk about Ashkenazic Jews. These are not Ashkenazic Jews. Ashkenazic Jews have been in Europe for centuries, in Northern Europe, but that's a subject for another talk. Yeah, so focus on the left route. I think what Helene meant by Barbados was the Bahamas. The main distinguishing feature of the Bahamas, it's actually not in the Caribbean. It is a tropical island, but it's in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And the only reason it's warm is because it's in a warm Gulf Stream current. So it's not in the circle that starts with Jamaica and goes around through Puerto Rico and, like this. It's up here. I think it's due east from Florida. Yeah. Anyway, let's take a look at this as a preview. So these are the types of shots that I'm going to show you. So I'm going to show you for each island what it looks like, where the synagogue I want to focus on is, and then something about the history and traditions. So this is called the Luis de Torres Synagogue. Luis de Torres actually may have been on the 1492 trip of Columbus because of his language skills. He spoke Arab, Hebrew, and Chaldaic. Chaldaic was like near Babylon, I guess near Syria and stuff like that. Unfortunately, de Torres died. Columbus's first mission settled in modern Haiti, and they were attacked, and so we don't know very much more about Torres. As far as the synagogue that he's named for, Luis de Torres Synagogue, this is kind of an example of modern Caribbean. So it would be more the subject of what I'm going to talk about next time. The modern Caribbean ones would be maybe Jews that were vacationing there and decided to go to the synagogue there, maybe some local people, but not that many. And it was the membership was dwindling for a while until finally COVID just killed it. So this is like, unfortunately, a lot of the synagogues I'll talk about, it's a non-operating synagogue. But I think I said on the first slide, if I didn't emphasize this is going to be, you're eating Caribbean food, some of you, and this is about the food from that region. So Curacao, there's a Curacao dish, which is called tutu, which has black-eyed peas, and it mixes them with coconut milk. So the coconut milk is definitely from the Caribbean, that's not from Europe. But the black-eyed peas they're from Spain. So the Sephardic Jews actually brought black-eyed peas to the New World. And of course, they're all over the Caribbean. It's like almost a staple these days. These recipes, yeah. And it also blends in, the last ingredient there is Dutch cheese, showing the Dutch heritage of many of the albums of Dutch history, of many of the islands. Okay, so what I aim to do is take you on a cruise. We just did the Bahamas. And so there, 1, 2, 3, 4, whoop, you sure you want to do that? Maybe you should do it at another table. So Barbados is in there, as I said, but there are some other ones. The two oldest are Curacao and Barbados. You can also see the recipes, including something called breadfruit matzo balls, which I think is pretty cool. And then on St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands, they have a synagogue name that's so long that I asked Rabbi Heidi to translate it, and she did. So, yeah, and in general, I was able to find out a lot about these islands, except Cuba. I don't think there's no Jews that I can get in touch with on Cuba. I think that's a case where not just the synagogue is shut down, but the whole island, you know, I think very, very few Jews anymore. Okay, so first let's talk about Curacao, which is in the Southern Caribbean, about 100 miles north of Caracas, Venezuela. It's interesting. It's, you know, we can get into the geography of it and why there, I could go into question, why all the towns are on the left side, which is the leeward side of the island, you're saying album. Okay, so they have a synagogue there, and I've been there, and it's called Snoa or Mikveh Israel. The name Snoa comes from Esnoga, which is one of the oldest, maybe the oldest congregation in Europe. It's in Amsterdam. And interestingly, its first cousin was named Isaac Turo, right? So you've probably heard the word Turo College, Turo Synagogue in Rhode Island. That's all named after Isaac Turo. So, you know, in general, I think the Dutch were tolerant. They didn't care what religion you were. They just wanted you to be able to make money for them, and then they'd be happy. But more on that, more on the business side in a minute. Yeah, and the one in Curacao has a sand floor, not like a marble floor or wood floor. Some people think that's because of, you know, if the Marranos are praying there, it would mean you couldn't hear their footsteps. So provides an element of security. But there's also some interesting history in Curacao from a business perspective, or from a trade perspective. Because you see, the Dutch wanted it to be what's called an entrepot, an entry port, essentially, which would be an island that communicated with the other islands in the Caribbean. And they told that to the Sephardic Jews who were there, and the Sephardic Jews thought about it and said, no, we're not going to do that. Because what they could do is, because the Dutch could only communicate with other islands they could talk to and that they knew the culture. Well, the Sephardim knew the so-called Spanish Main, right? So they know Mexico, they know South America, they know much wider region. And instead of, you know, trading in sugarcane, they were trading in gold and silver, which is much more lucrative. And that was called, you know, the Sephardic trade system, and existed from the first time kind of they were there till 1630 to 1700. And indeed, here's the kind of thing that trader who's trading in silver and gold would come home and have a dinner. So it's red snapper, but it has matzo meal in it. And I think Pisca Hasa is Ladino or some Creole. So it has limes, it has cilantro. Again, that gives it kind of the Caribbean taste, and then it has matzo. I'm going to make these recipes available. You don't have to write them down. So Barbados is an interesting history, though. Again, in this case, the Jewish community is largely left, but there's actually some stuff there from the earliest Sephardic Jews that still remains. Different shape island, Eastern Caribbean, and I'm showing where the synagogue is, although this is not an operating synagogue. It's a museum and has some beautiful works, beautiful facade. It's a recreation of the one that was from 1654, which was destroyed in the hurricane. And likely we can trace the Jewish history there to Dutch Jews, Jews that came with the Dutch to Brazil. And then when the Portuguese took over Brazil, they sought refuge in other islands. So the reason that it's now a museum is because they discovered a mikvah, but I'll get to that in a minute. Let's see, I think I've said most of these. Oh, yeah, we could talk about the names of these synagogues. Like this synagogue, it may be that it's kind of a messianic view, a kind of Moshiach will come here. It's the synagogue of the scattered Israel. So somehow the scattering of Israel from Spain is a sign that, you know, Moshiach is coming soon. But another thing we know is that Sephardim were very, at the beginning anyway, were very isolating, that they only married within the, you know, within themselves. So that's obviously not good for the gene pool. Ultimately, they did intermarry, and there's some question about the time that Jews were actually considered to be white on Barbados, because they were not initially, and may have been darker skinned coming from Spain. So being Creolized means that you're part of the population. And here is the, let's see, I think I might have put the wrong talk on here, because there is a section, I can send it out on the mikvah. Maybe I put the slide somewhere else. Oh, here it is. Okay. All right. Right. I'm sorry. It's previewing the wrong thing. Okay. Another sip of coffee will help. So in 2008, they discovered a mikvah from the 1600s there. There was some construction by the rabbi's house by this mikvah Israel one that they had. But previously it had been covered by a parking lot, at least for, you know, for some time, for over 100 years. It's beautiful. It's, you know, it's 12 feet deep, 4 feet wide. As it says here, it has granite and marble and beautiful lamps. And I can just show you some photos of it. On the left is what it looks like above ground after the restoration. The middle one, you're actually looking down the steps. No, sorry, the right is the steps, and the left is looking down actually into the pool of water. So it's it was an interesting revelation for people there. And then let's talk about breadfruit. These things, I guess, to me look like Osage oranges, but they're actually more like potatoes. Common in the Caribbean. I understand you can buy them in our neighborhood here. And the whole point was that if you're making matzo balls, you know, they might not have had access to a lot of things that you would have in the US or Europe, but they knew that this was a potato. So they knew therefore that the flour was parve and could be used to make matzo balls. So, yep. And this is an island, and this recipe is from this island. You know, it mostly looks like a regular recipe. You know, you pat them like this, you boil them, but it does have the special flour. Okay, so now let's go. So Barbados and Curacao are the islands we probably know the most about. But I want to touch a few other ones because people talk about particular synagogues and particular history. And one of the ones that people talk about is in the town of Charlotte-Amalie in St. Thomas. Another very long name for synagogue. And yeah, it's sort of on the bottom southern part of the island. So it dates from the 1800s. So I don't know whether the whole history of that is known, but there must have been ones on the island before that. The Virgin Islands I'll talk about their history in a minute. That may explain part of it. What I find interesting is that when they put it together, they use sand and limestone, which you use in concrete all the time, and molasses. So that would again be something unique to the Caribbean in the construction of the synagogue. It claims to be the second oldest US synagogue, and it claims it is the first in the US to fly the US flag. So in fact, some Jews arrived in the 1600s as at other places, but this was a possession of the country of Denmark. And it was as and until the US bought it in the modern period, 1917. Importantly, the Danish, like the Dutch, were clearly more tolerant of religion, and they specifically granted everyone freedom of religion. Okay, so let's talk about how you make harosa Caribbean style. This is back from Curacao, but I think it's probably pretty common to the region to do this. So here are some things that you probably don't put in your Curacao, in your harosa. Dates, figs, prunes, right? And you'll see no apples. What? Right, right. Sephardic harosa, yeah. Right. But it's not only Sephardic, the kind of orange that they're using in this is from Venezuela. And so it's Caribbean Sephardic. It's again, this fusion of, I don't think you would have dates and figs when there was of the Sephardic Jews in Amsterdam, right? So you use what you have around you. And of course, this has kosher wine in it. Okay, now to Cuba, which I already said earlier, it's very hard to find out anything about Jewish history. It's interesting, a couple of college friends are there right now, but they're not Jewish, but I'm sort of interested in. Looks like there's some beautiful views. One of the things I found out about Havana is that it's not really centered on the island. For whatever reason, it's in the northwest corner. So I don't know. I don't know very much about. I guess this might be rustic down here. So, yeah, Jews can date their history there back to, again, Brazil, the Exodus from Brazil. The Dutch were bringing them there. But most of the rest of the history is pretty close to 1900, if not exactly. I mean, 1898 is the Spanish-American War. I mean, I'll just through these bullets here are sort of a preview of the things that I would talk about with 1900, right? Including escaping Marxist Leninist policy in Europe, Nazism in Europe, that many came to Spain that way. Many came to Cuba that way. And then this is a dish where it's a mostly veggie dish. You can do it with a vegetable broth. This one has chicken broth, but it's basically mixing okra and plantains. Yeah. And something called cachuca pepper, which they say is sweet. In my experience, if you cook with a pepper, you better try a little piece of it before you put it out for your guests. So, and it also has limes. So, and you can see it's called a la Sephardi. So, okay, and so then the last stop on the tour is Puerto Rico, and it was part of historic settlements, like some of the islands we're talking, and also has a contemporary community, being in the same neighborhoods, kind of as St. Thomas and Cuba. So Temple Beth Shalom is in the capital, San Juan, and it's more of an example of a modern synagogue. Since it's called Beth Shalom, it's like the right Beth Shalom and that. So But I think most people know Puerto Rico's been dealing with all these disasters, it seems like every other year. So Fiona is currently a big deal. If you go on the synagogue website, they'll tell you, please help out with Fiona. On the more creative side, I have not seen this before. They do haikus for parshas. Right, so this is Bereshit. In the beginning, oneness breathed us into life, we are here. So. It's a little bit more about Puerto Rico. I already mentioned that Conversos came with Columbus on the first voyage. They also came on the second voyage, which is where Columbus discovered San Juan. The first time he went to Haiti, second time San Juan. Now, if you're familiar with the geography of Puerto Rico, when you're near the ocean, it's pretty open and pretty easy to get around. But once you start getting into like the center of the island with these coffee farms and things like that, it's a good place to hide. And a lot of crypto Jews, if you will, met in the mountains and met secretly. As a result, of course, they didn't make big synagogues that everybody would know where they were. But we know that there was, something. We also know that as on the other islands, there was intermarriage. And so that, yeah, they may have lost some of their Jewish values. 1898, when Cuba got liberation, you did have, people thinking about leaving the island, and particularly when Castro came. Everybody says the Cubans all went to Miami. Well, that's not exactly true. Some also went to Puerto Rico. So, and this is, and now go to a Jewish fish. It's called mojo isleno, islander sauce or something like this. And it's a really popular sauce in Puerto Rico. It's there are mojo isleno festivals where you can go and kind of like pour it on everything. In this case, you're putting it on fish. The core of the recipe is two things: olives and tomatoes. Yeah, so just finishing up. Here's some great references. I'll give my thank yous maybe after I say this paragraph, but a big thank you here to the Jewish Museum of Amsterdam. They're great. So they referred these books. Some of these may be out of print in English, might be, but we all know how to find used books these days. And so different thing, focusing on the Dutch parts of the Spanish diaspora in the Caribbean. So yeah, I had great help from them. I had great help from Yvette and Wayne. I also went out to my college networks, to the synagogue networks here, and everybody helped out on one or more things. So now I guess I just want to get on a real cruise and go to all these places. So that's it. I guess I'll leave this up if there's questions, or let's see, I don't know. To get back to the Zoom, yeah. I don't know what I'm doing. I think I'm on somewhere, but so I don't know if people ask questions on the Zoom, I'm not sure. But thanks very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Before we continue, I would just like to thank Jonathan for bringing his program. I'm sorry. I don't normally, yeah. I want to thank Jonathan for putting this program together. And I just want to say that this Jewish Star I bought in the gift shop of the Amsterdam Jewish Museum. Thank you. So I had to wear it today.
John, there were 12 chats. I don't know if there might be questions online.
I'm looking at it right now. So they were mostly not questions. Patricia commented about her Caribbean Jewish ancestry.
I got it up.
You got it up? Okay.
But is there anyone that is a question?
I don't see any specific questions. So we are open to questions from the room. Or folks on Zoom, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question if you want to.
What Patricia has said.
We can show it on the screen here if people want to see it. Well, I can read it quickly. So Patricia said, you asked me about my Caribbean Jewish ancestry. Yes, on my mother's side of the family and her family tree, we have African Jews, Indian and Assyrian Jews. They came to Jamaica during the 18th century. The ones from Africa, the African continent came as slaves. The Indians as indentured servants, and Assyrians came later on my dad's side of the family. My dad's side of the family came from the Congo much earlier than my mother's side. My dad is not Jewish, but my mom is. She was very mutual most of her life. One thing I noticed about our family, as soon as they grew up to a certain age, they left Jamaica and headed to other countries. Many of them are in the US, Canada, UK, the Cayman Islands, Bahamas, Bermuda, St. Croix, and St. Kitts.
So that's great. In fact, I think what you'll see is in the 1900 and beyond talk, the Caribbean was almost like a train station for a lot of people to transfer trains. That people wanted to get out of Europe, and then they would try to get to one of the larger countries like the US or Canada, Brazil, Australia. There's less of a real immigration. But
Ellen,
Helen,
maybe I got this one, I might have. Did you say something like that the conversion process began with the Inquisition? That was, no, we did not.
no, we seem to be able to trace it at least back to 1391. The Inquisition is the late 1400s, like around the time of Columbus.
You would say before that, like when the construction of the temple, the converted.
Well, again, I'm focusing on Spain. So,
Okay, and the other thing I wanted to say, it sounded like conversos and Moranos were two different people. They were the same, right? One was.
No,
No,
Converso is someone who's forced to convert, usually baptized. A Marano is a subset of that. It's the conversos who then became crypto Jews and practiced Judaism anyway.
not all conversos. No, I thought it was pejorative term, Moranos.
It is, it is in Spanish, because it means pigs, basically.
Right.
But
it's used, right. In other words, people, it was an insult, it was jarred, it was people who supposedly converted, but continued to practice Judaism, like we spoke about. The tenants, the laws. But the conversos, like, made it seemed as if they voluntarily did that with the choice. I
No,
don't
it's
think that was
forced
voluntary either.
Converso means forced conversion.
Right. So to me, the two groups are very similar.
Yeah, well, you don't know who a Marano is. It's done in secret. So, I mean, if you're looking at a group of people.
I know it's gonna come up in the next talk, hopefully we'll have another, but of all these synagogues that you mentioned, are any of them actively still being used as a synagogue?
Yeah, I mean, Curacao is, Barbados is a museum. There may also be one in Aruba. There's, it depends what you mean by used. Again, I think I made a distinction between ones that, let's say.
But have services and still do,
Sure, I mean, I think there's probably synagogues that have services in, let's say, every state in the US, but the question is there a Jewish community in that state, on the island? Or is it just like to help with people who are flying there, they take a week or two there. So Curacao has a community for sure.
thank you. The one on the other side.
Okay, yeah, maybe we'll go back and forth. I'll do this and we'll come back. Right.
Do you consider?
Yes. And hi, is it Jonathan is your name?
Hi.
Hi, this is Patricia. How are you? Shabbat shalom, everybody. Yes, you probably heard there's a center in Manhattan, I think, for Jewish history. Yvette Pomerantz and I went there some time ago, and they did mention about.
I'm sorry, sir. Could you stop for a minute? Okay, Patricia, I can't see anyone who's talking, so I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, you can't see me?
Oh, yeah, there's a tiny postage stamp up there.
Let me put the light on, hold on. I thought you
Patricia,
could see.
yeah, could we hold on? could we, thank you, I know you're responding to, because it was your original question. But someone in the room was in the middle of asking a question, so I think,
Oh, I'm sorry.
I don't know whether you're listening to the audio yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me get you the view. That will make it easier for you to see. Who is here?
But I'll come to you next, Patricia,
Okay, no problem.
and then I'll come over here.
Actually, go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry, John. Go ahead.
I forget what I was gonna ask. Is the US Virgin Islands considered part of what you're discussing?
Yeah,
Because there's a huge Jewish population in St. Louis,
I mentioned the St. Thomas Synagogue.
because my family is in St. Louis.
Okay.
And there's a big
If there's a-
synagogue.
Okay, yeah, what I know about it is in St. Thomas. I spoke about the one in St. Thomas. If there's interesting things about the one in St. Croix, I'd like to know more about it.
Very- Got my family.
Okay, sorry, Patricia, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, sorry. What I was saying, Yvette Pomerantz and myself, we both went to the Jewish Heritage Center in Manhattan some time ago, and they mentioned about the Caribbean. It's not just only in Cuba, in many of the Caribbean islands, they were there. In Jamaica, I think in the 13th century, they had a lot more synagogues back then at the time, or, and then they left sometime, I don't know if it's in the 1800s, they started leaving, but there was a lot of synagogues in the Caribbean. So you'll find that there's a number of people that have intermingled with the people there.
Yeah, I actually read a paper on Jamaica when I was preparing this, but it seemed like it would be better in the modern period. And that was, it basically starts with the period when the UK ends slavery in its
Right.
colonies. Of course, that was a lot before the US did. I think it was 1820 or something, or 1815. So that, and then the question was, how did Jews get perceived after the end of slavery? Particularly if they were slave owners, large slave owners before. And do they assimilate it? Beside, you said that people leave in the 1800s. That might have also been because the economy then had to change.
Yeah, some of them may have probably remained and some have left, but there was some that have remained and they remained then they blended in with the rest of the population, and then many of us do keep up the religion in those days too, but it probably was not mentioned, but they do, observe all the holidays and the Sabbath and so on. You find
One of my college friends who's from the Virgin Islands, who knew a lot about the Virgin Islands, is a Navy captain and Navy, whatever, senior Navy guy. And we talked a lot about that. I believe it's the father side of his family is Sephardic. Yeah.
I have a friend, one of my friends from Cuba. Some of you may have heard her name mentioned a lot in the Mishabera, Miss Elena Aram. She was born in Cuba. You mentioned part of the history of how some of the families came from Spain. She had family from Spain and Portugal. Her mother is of Turkish descent also, and her father's side is from Poland, but she was born in Cuba. And then
definitely. I'll definitely circle back. I just think in the interest of time, it looks like there's some more questions around the room.
All right, thank you.
Back. No, particularly on Jamaica. I want to know more about Jamaica for the next talk.
All right, we'll talk about that another time. Let the others ask questions. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was
Thanks,
wondering if you could share your slides with us.
Yeah, I have
I'm very interested in all the historical.
Right, I have these as a PDF. Mike has them, and I think if it's okay with the organizers, we can talk here. That's fine with me.
I would like to.
You certainly can't write down those recipes too fast.
aside from the recipes, I would like to see the slides of.
Yeah,
PowerPoint. What you're asking for.
right. Well, you can blow up some of those photos. Yeah, some of those photos I didn't know really the size of the screen. You might want to expand a little bit so you can see some of the, like the mikvah.
That's what I'm talking about.
I just wanted to say two quick things, and I had a question. I don't know if Joyce remembers, but many years ago, we did a program on, concerning Cuban Jews, because actually there have been missions going out. I don't know about right at this time, but over the years with the, obviously, lack of communication to the United States and Cuba, you can only do certain things or religious missions and things like that.
Can't find anything. I mean, I went through a list of contacts and nobody got back to me.
I'm just making a comment that they have been doing these missions. And there are communities there who, some of them may not, maybe they have Jewish background, maybe they're not currently practicing Jews, but I just wanted to mention that. I also do want to mention, I know what Patricia was talking about, we went to a very interesting lecture about Jews of color in America before 1700s or the 1800s, I guess, and it focused on Jews in the Caribbean, and they actually had a case study of this family with the owner, the plantation owner was Jewish. He married an enslaved woman, and they had children. And unlike the United States, children, because of the word marriages in the United States between plantation owners and enslaved people, the children became slaves. In this case, once they married and had children, the children are considered white. They were given all the rights and privileges of white people, and this couple, the young man, the brother and sister, came to New York. They were wealthy, they were very well regarded, they married well, they were successful, and so on. My question was, I was interested in this phenomenon of the temples with the sand floors. Were there only those two that had the sand floors?
Yeah, I think there may be some other ones in the Caribbean.
And that's like unique to the Caribbean, right? That's not something we would see in a synagogue in other parts of the world.
Right. Well, but it may have been what they literally had to do is put bags of sand down when they were in Spain and then in Portugal.
Yeah.
Just to keep the footprints down.
Oh, she's saying they did do it in Europe, and they brought that custom into.
It might have been. I didn't,
Okay.
I don't think
They
I,
did it in
I,
there.
yeah, in Amsterdam for sure. I think I didn't give that whole bullet point. Some people think the sand is there to remind us of the Exodus. It's less of a scary.
Right. Do we have other questions or comments?
Oh, I do. I just want to hijack. I just want to say that I love the idea of the synagogue being constructed with limestone and sand and molasses. So molasses is associated with making Torah learning.
Oh.
That's nice.
So there it is. It's mixed right in the building. You can't miss it.
Don't try.
Looking at it, not-
No, actually, I think there were some stories that kids would try to break off pieces of it and eat it.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I went to a service at the synagogue in St. Thomas. And it was really lovely and some of the sand and the service had more of a Sephardic flavor with instruments, tambourine and maracas, and it was just beautiful. It was
Yeah.
I don't know, 8 years ago or something.
I mean, needless to say, I've traveled a lot in Italy, maybe 4 or 5 times. And so most of the Jews that got to Italy that did it on the slide that I showed you, they didn't come with the rest of the Sephardian. So towns like Luria, famous town, and also, fortunately, I've had the honor of giving an Aliyah in Venice at the old synagogue. So it's all Sephardic.
we had a former convert is now married to a rabbi in New Hampshire. And and for the holidays, she was song leader at the synagogue.
Spiritual week. She did the services.
Yeah.
Maybe we can put them together. During the summer. Yeah.
As a matter of fact, she posted something on Facebook where she received an honor.
Yeah.
And mentioned that in the Facebook also.
Anyone else? I'll stay up here for a little bit after the talk ends. Otherwise,
Does anyone have anything else?
anyone on Zoom have a question?
Just thank you very much.
I'm bad news, I show up a second time, and I wanted to thank Jonathan again for the delightful presentation.
Oh, and we recorded this and we intend, Mike is gonna help me put it up on YouTube.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much.
I'm happy to distribute the PDF to the whole congregation or whatever. I can give it to you. I don't have the distribution. I don't have that.
I don't personally, because I usually fix the house.
Thank you.
John, can you get your title slide back up?
Very good.
Yeah, Colleen, get your obligatory picture.
He wants to take a photo. Yeah. That's what it was.
Still standing. Colleen, nice and tight. Yes, we close. There we go. Oh, that'll work fine. Perfect. 1 and 2. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
I didn't even think of that. That was a good idea.
Nobody heard me. I had the thing on.